So, welcome back, everybody, to True Crime Convos. I am your host, Lainey. I'm host of the True Crime Fan Club podcast, the It's Haunted What Now podcast, the Crimes of Passion podcast on Spotify, which is a Parcast original. And I am also the host of this True Crime Convos on Spotify Live. Welcome everybody as they're joining the chat. Welcome everybody on Facebook, Twitch, and on YouTube. We're everywhere tonight. It's not every day that I'm live streaming simultaneously while doing Spotify Live, but here we are. This is what we're doing. And tonight we are going to be talking about the House of Gucci murder, also known as the murder plot created by and brain dumped by Patrizia Reggiani. I can only say it in an Italian somewhat accent. As you know, we start off every live show with an ASL. So it's important for me to know where you're at, where you're coming from. So I am Lainey. I am a 34-year-old cis female, she, her pronouns in the Dallas area. And that's it. So everybody make sure you list your ASL in the chat if you're on Spotify Live, in the Facebook comments, YouTube comments, and in the Twitch comments if you're there. I see we have Kimmy joining us back from Canada. So welcome back, or bonjour, Kimmy, Cecile, Megan. Oh, I'm so excited for your haunted one later. Eric, Sherion, Casey, welcome as we get started. Okay, so we're going to go into the whole Patrizia Reggiani thing. I wanted to do this one for a while, especially after seeing the House of Gucci movie, me being a Lady Gaga fan. It was very weird to see her impersonate Patrizia, and I think she did a really good job. If you don't think she did a good job, that's fine. Totally get it. So let's talk a little bit about Patrizia, because sometimes I feel like I don't have enough content and then I end up going way past our time. So let's get started and let's talk a little bit about the life of Patrizia. So she was born December 2nd, 1948, out in a small town outside of Milan. So she grew up poor and she didn't know her biological father. But when she turned 12, her mother married Ferdinando Reggiani, who was an entrepreneur who adopted Patrizia as his own and spoiled her with lavish gifts. So there wasn't a lot of time, 12 years, sure. There wasn't a ton of time where she spent in this kind of poorness, if you will. She'll kind of be living in this like lap of luxury for a while thanks to her stepfather. Um, Now, despite his wealth and being considered a socialite, she was still not a part of the high society. Hi, Melissa at YouTube. Nice to see you. Also, drop your ASL if you can. Um, Her mother was really hopeful and kind of had helped groom Patrizia, if you will, with the idea that she might find an opening into high society. I think we kind of see this in those like made for lifetime movies, right? Where you think like, oh, this money is going to change everything for you and you'll suddenly be accepted. But I think there's a really big difference with people who are born into money and then others who come into money. And Patricia is a person who came into money. So oftentimes when those situations happen, we kind of see other people like in the high society turning up their noses, right? Um, it's really stupid, but that's what they do. So her mom was really hopeful that maybe she would find her way inside to a high society, you know, club or friend group. Now, she did end up finding this opening, but it wasn't through friends and it wasn't through any type of club or social gathering. It was actually when she met Maurizio, the heir to the Gucci name. So Maurizio was 22 at the time when they met. He was still living at home. He was tall, awkward, but he was one of the most eligible bachelors in all of Italy. And I think they did a good job putting Adam Driver in this role in that House of Gucci movie, because he kind of has that weird, like the Davidson vibes, right? Like the guy who when you look at him on the surface isn't, like, hot or anything, and you're just like, "Oh, I'm kind of attracted to your personality," and things like that. Like, I feel like Adam Driver gives those vibes, like Pete Davidson vibes. I don't know. And that's kind of how Maurizio looked. If you look at pictures of him online and of Patrizia, they're both good-looking people, but none of them, in my opinion, are, like, stunners where you'd be like, "Oh my god," like Donatella, for instance. Even though she's had a lot of facial work done, she is and was a very beautiful, young woman. So since Patricia was the opposite of Maurizio, like we said, Maurizio was tall, awkward. Patrizia learned to be the opposite. She was the petite person who entered the room and was full of life, and she commanded an audience when she walked in. It was the attention she needed to be able to feel like she was ingrained and accepted into the community. So they actually met at a party in 1970, and Patrizia said that it was a really awkward encounter. She said, "My encounter with Maurizio was awkward. My best friend said to me, 'Look, you have to drag Maurizio to my party.' And I asked her, 'Who is Maurizio?' I went up to the front, I went up to the first floor and he arrived. He said, 'When can I talk to you?' And I said, 'Later.' But then I had already noticed that he liked me. And if you guys have seen any videos, past or present, of Patrizia talking about herself and her interaction with Maurizio, especially in the beginning, oh my gosh, there's no bigger fan of Patrizia Reggiani than herself. She for sure is that person in the stands, like, in her brain with the number 1 foam finger and is like, "Yay, Patrizia!" She's she is that person 100%. She is her biggest fan. So she was just like, "Of course, I already knew he liked me, and I could just tell he was head over heels." And so she decided to invite him out to a nightclub to, like, join her and her friends. And she had actually come with another man who was driving a Porsche. She makes that very clear. It's like he was driving a Porsche. Like, she would not waste her time with anything less. And again, love to hate her, it's just like, of course, she's just that person. So Maurizio arrived in a smaller car. She was like, you know, he drives this really small car. There's no room for me and no room for my things. And so at that point, I decided, okay, he's a loser. And then she gets a call from him and he's like, "Listen, I found this restaurant that's really nice. Let's go there tomorrow evening." And that same evening, he said, "Listen, what do you say to becoming Patrizia Gucci?" And she was like, "I'm sorry, what? Have you gone mad?" And then that's when they started dating. And she goes, "Back then, I was really fun, not like how I am now. Besides my looks, Maurizio loved everything about me." So I don't know. Sometimes I feel like her representation of their meeting is not accurate and not actually um, true. Like everything is in painting her in the best light and not necessarily Maurizio. But I think we can all gather that she is very much her friends or very much her favorite person in the world. Now, Rodolfo Gucci did not like Patrizia from the moment that he heard about her. Rodolfo is Maurizio's father or was Maurizio's father. He was actually very protective of Maurizio because he was his only child. Um, Maurizio's mother had passed away when he was 5 years old, and it had only been just the 2 of them for the last 17 years. And so I imagine that from a parental standpoint, especially with how much Mauricio has to gain as a part of the Gucci name, and at the time, let's recall, Gucci wasn't the big name that we know it now, right? It was popular, but um it wasn't something that everybody was, like, clamoring to get, or was, like, the lap of luxury, if you will. That comes a little bit later, and that name is a little bit more established as time goes on, but at that time, he did gain or he stood to inherit a sizable, you know, income from taking over Gucci. So he was protective of that, but he was also just protective of his son overall. He was just like, "This woman is clearly a gold digger in his opinion. She's only interested in him because of his money, and I really don't like her." Um, so Rodolfo was suspicious of her, and he even told Maurizio, he was like, "Listen, I know that this isn't about love. This is about her wanting to get her hands on our money, but she won't. I will disinherit you. You will not get a cent from me, and neither will she. So instead of encouraging Maurizio to kind of be smart, imagine how this ultimatum was taken. It was either pick your inheritance and the Gucci name or pick Patrizia. What do you think he picked? Also, feel free to chime in. Here we go in the chat. Yes, we already had some interactions on our Twitch. Yes, he chose Patrizia. Um, so he packed up his things and he went to work for the Reggianis, who took him in after basically his father disinherited him. His father was true to his word. As soon as he was like, "You choose to stay with her, you choose to walk away from everything." And so he walked away and went with the Reggianis. So Patrizia knew that Maurizio's calling was to run the Gucci business. So in 1971, Rodolfo's brother Aldo told the New York Times that he wanted a young family member to take over the business, hinting that his own sons were not up for the task. So he was like, listen, my kids, it's a Robert Durst situation, right? Where like Robert Durst is supposed to be the person who takes over the family business, but he's a little unhinged. So instead, it goes to like Douglas, who's a little bit more stable and everything. So Patricia is aware of that. Maurizio also has a good relationship with his uncle. And so on despite October 28th, 1972, despite the objections from Maurizio's father, Patrizia and Maurizio end up getting married. Um, Aldo helped the two get their footing in New York, and the two had their first daughter, Alessandra, in 1976. So after Alessandra was born, Rodolfo decided it was time to make up with the new family, and he bought them a loft in New York. So he was like, listen, I want to see my grandkid. I want to have a better relationship with my son. This is the only like family member I have within my immediate family. And so I would just want to make everything right. So in 1981, they end up having another daughter. Her name is Allegra. The couple was becoming quite the notorious couple on the New York social scene. They were befriending people like the Kennedys, other celebrities. They were attending events and owning lavish homes, including a 9,000 square foot Fifth Avenue penthouse in Manhattan's Olympic Tower, a villa in Mexico, a farm in Connecticut, their 64-meter long wooden yacht called the Creole. Now, I get having a ton of money, right, and wanting to, like, throw it around. I mean, I don't know how necessary all these homes are, but I would rather stay in a hotel. I don't know. How do you guys feel about that? I like the idea of having a farm, a villa. Um, maybe I don't know. Maybe I would like all that. Who knows? I'm probably the worst person to have that much money anyways. So that's a little bit about Patricia's background, how she came to meet Maurizio, and then that kind of strife within the family. Now, the Gucci family created the Gucci fashion house in 1921 as a luxury luggage brand. It was founded by Guccio Gucci, who was inspired to start the company after working as a bellhop at the Savoy Hotel in London and a gig working for an upscale train travel company. So the first shop was opened in Florence in 1922, and they offered luxury leather luggage, accessories, and even leather items for horsemen. That's how old this is. Also, water break. Make sure you're drinking your water. I feel like I'm severely dehydrated for no good reason. Yes. So Daniel said the thing that comes to mind when owning something huge is that it would take a lot of effort just to maintain it. But I guess when you have that much money and people are paying for it, I guess it doesn't matter, right? It's like, sure, manage my lot. And you could also rent it out. So, but I don't know if like rich people do things like that. Like if they go and have the 64-foot yacht and it's now being housed somewhere, obviously, like at a dock. So do they like rent it out so that they can make their money back? That's what I would do. But again, I don't have millions of dollars to decide that. So the business was slow to get started, but it started to kind of get its boom, and there were stores opening everywhere, especially with all of Guccio's sons working for him. He had Vasco, Aldo, Rodolfo, and Ugo, who was Guccio's adopted stepson from his wife's previous relationship. So Guccio passed away 1953 and left his shares of the company to his three biological sons, which of course created this huge feud in the business that would eventually lead to the downfall of being and staying a family business, if you will. So things were just kind of all great until 1983, and that's when Rodolfo passed away. So Rodolfo left all of his shares in the Gucci business to Maurizio, and then later to Paolo Gucci, Aldo's son, gave all of his shares to Maurizio as well, making him the majority shareholder and the head of Gucci. So he knew that this was a bad idea, seeing as he knew of problems but had no idea how to solve them. So he packed up and left. And so Patrizia was a major part in the Gucci business, usually being the one to tell Maurizio what to do. As she thought of him more so like a chair that takes the shape of whoever sits in it. That's what she said. And it was like, he basically did what I told him to do. And that's about as good as he's, good for. Um, she didn't really feel like he had the business sense, acumen, or drive to really do what she knew the House of Gucci could do. Um, so in 1985, the family ends up relocating to Milan, and Maurizio went on a business trip to Florence. Um, Now, this whole time that they're together, it's not like they have this very happy relationship, right? They're not like in wedded bliss and just like, oh my God, I love you. Oh my God, everything's amazing. Look at our two beautiful daughters. Look at all the wealth and everything we have. Patricia was not happy with what she had in her life, and Maurizio kind of was her whipping boy, if you will. Now, I mean, I think you see some of that a lot of that, the arguing and stuff in the House of Gucci movie. Um, so when they decided to move to Milan, they thought it would be a good idea. They'll be closer to family. They'll be, able to kind of be in the realm of the House of Gucci. But when they end up getting back to Milan, Maurizio says like, "Oh, I have this business trip in Florence. Gonna go. See you later." But he ends up sending a friend. Imagine this is the way you find out. He ends up sending a friend to go to Patrizia and tell her that the marriage is over and that he would not be returning home. Imagine. How pissed would you be? I would be like, not okay. Not okay, not okay, not okay. But yeah, that's basically how she found out that he wanted to get a divorce. But in 1991, he ends up living with his childhood friend, Paola Franchi, which this is what I think ignited Patrizia's jealousy and need for revenge. Because imagine they get a divorce. She no longer has any say or place in the business. It's all on Maurizio. So Patrizia is she identifies as a Gucci, like, forget the Reggiani name, she identifies as a Gucci. She feels like she's put in a lot of effort to make it work, to build up the business, and that she's responsible for half of its success. Maurizio does not see that. He's like, "Nope, my family, my name, my business." Um, so when he goes to live with Paola Franchi, this ignited that jealousy in Patrizia, and she was just like, "Oh, it is time to fight for what I want." But in 1993, he ends up selling his shares of the Gucci company, which of course pissed off Patrizia even more. She was like, I felt lost. I had a huge house, two kids. There was a nanny, but I was in shock. But when he came back, he didn't want to be together. The marriage was over. Maurizio decided to sell his shares and sold it to the Bahrain-based Investcorp for $170 million. Gucci was in foreign hands. So on this, she was feeling really lost. She was obviously upset about the trade, but she ends up also getting a brain tumor the year prior and then had to go under for surgery and have that removed. She told The Guardian in 2016 that she was angry with Maurizio about many, many things at that time. But above all, she was mad about losing the family business because it was a stupid business move. It was a failure, and she was filled with rage, but there was nothing that she could do. She had no stake in the game. Um, and she basically said, like, he shouldn't have done that to her. And I think that kind of highlights a really big, important point here is that Patrizia believes that everything Maurizio did was a slight towards her. when truly he was not equipped to run that business. And so I think that making the choice of, hey, I can get this $170 million payout and walk away and do something I actually like, or I can stay in this business and maybe it'll tank and I get nothing out of it. Um, I'm very curious. What would you guys do if you were kind of faced with that dilemma? Feel free to put it in the chat for me to read. And then, of course, if you're joining us on the live stream, feel free to type it in your comment box, whichever one is available. Um, but I think I would do the payout. I'd be like, "Yes, I get the family business thing, but at some point, somebody's not gonna care, right? That it's, a family business or anything like that." So, my thing would be that I would likely sell it for the buyout price. Maybe I get a little bit more, and then do something I actually like to do. Patrizia couldn't get that. She didn't understand that. This was all an affront and offense to her. So, she was just like, "I'm upset, very angry." And in 1994, they officially got divorced, and Patrizia, in her opinion, got a mere bowl of lentils. But she actually received a $2.5 million divorce settlement and yearly alimony of 650,000 um, euros. So oh, and I think the biggest thing too, like, okay, 2.5 is nothing to scoff at, and plus you're getting 65 or 650,000 a year, like, you can do something with it, but when you're used to spending that much or when you are going, you know, head to head with somebody who's now inherited 170 million plus whatever else they had, yeah, it seems like a paltry amount, but the biggest blow to her, in her opinion, was that she lost the right to use the surname Gucci. She said, "I still feel like a Gucci. In fact, I'm the most Gucci of them all." And during this time, when he got his divorce, I think he was on this high to be like finally rid of the witch, if you will. And he went on a spending and hiring spree. He hired Dawn Mello, the woman who helped turn Bergdorf Goodman around, and they started to make Gucci a more exclusive brand. They cut out 70% of Gucci products and closed 82% of their stores. And Dawn hired a young designer. You may know who he is, you may not. His name was Tom Ford, and the two would be the saving graces of the Gucci business, but not the Gucci family. Now, March 27th, 1995, Maurizio Gucci is shot multiple times on the red granite stairs of his office building in Milan. He died in the arms of Giuseppe Ornato, the only witness who was also shot. Now, investigators worked on this case thinking it was related to the Gucci empire, but an anonymous tip in 1997 led them to Patrizia being arrested for his murder. She was, and you would be like, "Oh, how did they come to this daring conclusion?" Well, she was quite open with the idea that she wanted him dead. She reportedly had told her housekeeper, "If it's the last thing I do, I want to see him dead. Why don't you ask your boyfriend if he can find somebody to help me out?" And told the caretaker of their Switzerland estate to place gas cans around the estate, and she would take care of the rest. So she's basically like trying to entice people to help her murder Maurizio. Um, Her journal entry on March 27th, 1995 was only one word, which was paradisios, and I don't speak Greek, and I don't remember the appropriate pronunciation. Wow, but it's basically Greek for paradise. So they obviously believe that like she had some part in that, in setting up his murder. But within 3 hours, and this is the craziest part, in my opinion, right? Because you apparently love this man, allegedly, and you're pissed off and whatever, and like, okay, you say you want him dead. um, the first thing that she does within 3 hours of his death is go to the apartment and that Maurizio and, Paolo were living in and sharing a home together. She goes in and had filed a legal claim saying, like, "I'm his," Paolo and him weren't married, so she had no, like, legal rights to any of his property. He didn't leave anything to Paola in a will or anything like that. It all would default to Patrizia and their children. So, she gets a legal claim over the apartment, and she shows up and immediately kicks um, Paola and her son out. She shows up to the funeral. You can see pictures of this too. She shows up to the funeral. She's wearing these big black sunglasses, this veil, and she's telling reporters, like, on a human level, I'm so sorry. On a personal level, I can't say the same thing. Like, this is the father of your children, and you can't even like feign being upset for that. But she's she's kind of operating as a grieving widow, if you will, to the public and to the press. Like, it is an affront for sure. She is very, like, thrilled to be getting that attention. It's kind of like she's being thrust back into the spotlight, like, Mauricio's out and now she's in, or that's how she believed it. Um, Now Patrizia had made a call to Maurizio before he was killed saying, "You've reached the extreme limit of making yourself despised by your daughters who no longer want to see you to forget the trauma. You are a deformed outgrowth. You are a painful appendix that all of us want to forget. For you, hell is yet to come." So these are all threats, right? She's very much the early Betty Broderick, in my opinion. She's just like spewing out these really hateful things that are just unnecessary, but she's not shy about letting Maurizio or anybody else know how much she hates him. Now, that that anonymous tip that came in actually happened in January of 1997, and it was a call to criminal poll. And they were saying that the sleazy doorman of a Milan hotel had bragged to hotel guests about how he helped organize the murder of Maurizio with Pina Oriema, who was Patrizia's best friend. And they hired a suburban pizza shop owner and the mechanic who lived near the shop to act as a getaway driver and the assassin. Now, Patrizia had paid them $375,000 for the actions. And in 2016, she said it was worth every lira. Now, with this information, Criminal Poll launched a sting operation, placed trackers on the suspects' cars, and the operation only took a few weeks. Now, when arrested, Patrizia was wearing a full-length mink coat, diamond jewelry, and Filippo Nini, the head of the criminal poll, said, "I saw her as a woman with nothing inside, a woman who defined herself by the things around her, a woman who thought money could buy her everything. I'm not proud of this, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. She was surprised when she was arrested and said later, 'I didn't think they'd catch me.'" And that kind of goes a little bit against what Patricia says now, but we'll get into that in a minute. We'll talk about the trial next. In May of 1998, the trial begins. So the trial was flashy, of course, heavily publicized thanks to the influence of the Gucci family that they had at the time. And Patricia had been given the nickname the Black Widow. The prosecution had said Patrizia was obsessed with revenge after the breakup between the two, and that she had plotted the murder with Pina Ariema. Now, while Patrizia's lawyer, Gaetano Pecorella, she said Patrizia Gucci's defense is that she had an obsession. She wanted her husband dead, and she spoke about it to everyone. So Pina Ariema took advantage of this obsession and decided to kill Maurizio Gucci and to blackmail Patrizia Gucci. He also explained why she was absent from the first hearing, which was a false start of the trial because of health complications due to the surgery she had in 1992 to get the tumor out of her head. Um, they also said that the surgery was a way to say that Patrizia was mentally unstable, and Pina Oriema, Patrizia's old friend and personal psychic, admitted to hiring the hitman, saying she did it under Patrizia's instructions. So I ask you guys, who are we more keen to believe? Are we more keen to believe that Patrizia, or her defense rather, that Patrizia had just been a person who spouted off her hatred of her husband and was just like, man, I wish he was dead. And Pina being like, I see a great opportunity here to fleece money from my best friend. Or do we believe that Patrizia approached Pina and was like, "Hey, can you help me, best friend, and find a way to kill my husband with me?" And then, of course, came up with a plot which successfully ended the life of Maurizio. What are we more keen to believe? Water break while you guys decide. Okay, we have somebody on the stream saying they're more keen to believe that Patrizia approached Pina. Yes, I would say that I'm on the side that Patrizia, sorry if you might hear my mic, Patrizia approached Pina to help find somebody to assassinate her husband. I I don't see I don't see Pina being able to fleece Patrizia out of any money, knowing how much she liked it. So I can't imagine that she'd be like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I killed your husband and or your ex-husband, and I'm gonna blame you for the murder and say you made me do it unless you pay me $375,000." Um, Very weird. So I'm more keen to believe that Pina was acting under the direction of Patrizia. Now, during the trial, there was 43 boxes of evidence, which included all of Patrizia's journals, where she wrote every single interaction she had with Maurizio over the years, saying she had nothing better to do. Now, while on the witness stand, she claimed she was innocent, but was also angry that he gave her nothing in their divorce. Her final plea on November 4th, 1998, was that she was just a victim of Pina's greed, saying, "Never let even a friendly fox into the chicken coop. Sooner or later, it could get hungry." So, yeah, I don't know. Now, there were not any Gucci family members in attendance at the trial, seeing as Maurizio was not deeply mourned. So that's a little sad that his kind of extended family wasn't really interested in attending the trial or making any public statements about really their loss. Now, Patrizia, November 4th, 1998, she's convicted of premeditated murder and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but she only served 18. She was eligible for parole in 2011, but seeing as she would have needed to get a job, she decided to stay. She decided to stay, saying, "I've never worked in my life. I won't start now." And she was allowed to have a pet ferret while she was in prison. So 2016, she ends up getting released for good behavior. Could you imagine literally staying in prison because you refuse to get a job? Like, what? I would rather be in prison than work. Like, you don't even have to do anything difficult. You could literally just go get a job in the mailroom or something and sit on your ass and get out of prison. But you're like, no, 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 no. I'm not going to start working now. I'm going to just wait it out. I would be like, that's the kind of like, entitlement I would have no clue about. And it's so strange to me that she did that. Um, but anyways, so 2016, she ends up getting released for good behavior. She ends up getting a job as a design consultant for Beaux-Art, which was a, Milanese costume jewelry firm. Now, because of a 1993 agreement, she's entitled to and receives over $1 million annually from the Gucci estate. So she also gets a back payment of over $22 million, which accumulated during her time in prison. And in 2021, she told her story to Discovery Plus in an interview called Lady Gucci. Sentence her to community service. Yeah, she would she would lose her shit. She'd be like, "Help the poor, help the needy, there's no way." And also you have $22 million to walk out to. Like, you could literally create your own business and be like, "Okay, that's what I do for work," and sit somewhere else and do nothing, literally. That's so crazy to me. She would rather stay in prison. But maybe the Italian prison was nice. You know, I've seen some of those prisons, like, in Norway and stuff like that, where they're nice little apartment communities and great and wonderful. So maybe it was just like a nice little prison. It was like, "Oh, my own little apartment. What's a couple more years here?" Plus, I have a ferret. And also, ferrets, I don't think are really nice. So it kind of makes sense that she would choose a pet that's also not well liked. Like, it looks cute, but it could bite you and attack you. Right? Hmm. Okay. So, in regards to the movie House of Gucci, boy, does she have a lot to say about that. So she spoke out about Lady Gaga portraying her in the Ridley Scott film House of Gucci. And she said, "I am rather annoyed at the fact that Lady Gaga is playing me in the new Ridley Scott film without having had the consideration and sensibility to come and meet me." Also saying she was upset she was not involved in any part of how she wouldn't get a cent, or in any part of it, and how she wouldn't get a cent from it. She also said, "It is not an economic question. It is a good question. It is a question of good sense and respect." Now, Maurizio Gucci's second cousin, Patrizia Gucci, no relation to Patrizia Reggiani, made a statement on behalf of the Gucci family to the Associated Press saying, "I speak on behalf of the family. They are stealing the identity of a family to make a profit, to increase the income of the Hollywood system. Our family has an identity privacy. We can't talk about everything, but there is a borderline that cannot be crossed." Now, The House of Gucci was released worldwide on November 24th, 2021, with Lady Gaga portraying Patrizia and Adam Driver portraying Maurizio. Now, the film made 53.8 million in the box office and was given a 63% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, with the audience score being 83%. Now, the critics' consensus of the movie was that House of Gucci vacillates. Sorry, wow. Today, I promise, I don't know what's up with my speech patterns. I can't help it. Vacillates between inspired camp and noir drama, too often to pull off a confident runway strut, but Lady Gaga's note perfect performance has a timeless style all of its own. So that was Patrizia Reggiani. And yeah, she has no qualms about giving statements and stuff like that. I'm sure she enjoys getting paid, but I also wonder about her relationship with her daughters. From my understanding, the daughters have kind of stood by her side. Um, and it's, to me, really unfortunate. Like, they lost their father tragically, and sure, they were young teenagers whenever the divorce was happening and when he moved on with Paola Franchi and stuff. But I would think that now as adults, they have an understanding that their father was just like them, like a human being. And of course, made mistakes in his relationship with their mother and vice versa. And so I can't imagine that they would hold too much of this, like, supposed hatred that Patrizia said they had, um, against him even this long after his death. I mean, they're well into their adulthood now. So I wish we could kind of be a fly on the wall with that interaction and see how either they support her or how they kind of keep their distance. I imagine for Patrizia, it's a very lonely existence. She is, she's gonna be surrounded by yes people because she has the money to be surrounded by them. And I don't think for her, having anybody to connect with on a kind of human level, with those interpersonal relationships or having somebody to, like, come home to or anything like that, I don't think that that's important to her. I think a lot of her worthiness and a lot of her sense of self comes from the material items that she's able to have. Maybe I have it wrong, I don't know, but I imagine that she has a very lonely existence, but I'm also not sure she's aware it's lonely, right? She may be surrounded by many people, many things, but I'm not entirely sure she sees a problem with it. I think she's very, in her mind, happy with that, but I don't know, I thought it was just gonna be an interesting case to cover. I know it's a little short, which is fine because things have been crazy around these parts. But yeah, I just wanted to cover that. And then I'm also planning on having my friend Bob Mata, who hosts the Defense Diaries podcast. Um, he is a practicing defense attorney. His dad, I'm sure I've talked about him before. You guys are like, yes, we know Bob Laney. But he is a practicing defense attorney whose father was the defending attorney for, I think, the lead counsel for John Wayne Gacy. If you haven't listened to Defense Diaries, I highly recommend it because he has tapes. His dad basically, like, when he turned 18 or something like that, his dad gave him a box of tapes, which were just like his interview, which were like his audio recordings of him interviewing John Wayne Gacy during to figure out, like, what was going on, and so you really see a lot of the behind the scenes things, if you will, of what you don't normally see, which is those, privileged conversations. So, very, very interesting stuff. But, he also was an attorney in a very high profile case, um, where a doctor had let me see. I wanna find the name of the guy so you guys can see who it is. Um, it was a medical student, and once I tell you it, you might know. Um, it was in Omaha, Nebraska. Let's see. I'm trying to find it. It's season 2 now, but, oh my god, Donnie, you don't even wanna know. Okay, yeah, so the there's this whole thing between, Bob and the Netflix documentary. He's probably the best one to say it, but they basically, like, shafted him in that, like, I think they didn't highlight the unethical behavior of the detectives in the case. So there was planted evidence. It's not a theory, it's not a maybe. There was planted evidence. The thing that led to essentially John Wayne Gacy's arrest, I believe, during or whatever, part of the search was it was alleged by one of the detectives that they had found a receipt from Nissan Pharmacy, which is where Robert Peast last worked. So if you guys know anything about the John Wayne Gacy case, a lot of people will say that the Robert Peast disappearance and eventual murder is what led to his downfall because of this elusive receipt. Um, during the course of Bob's kind of investigation or rehashing of the Gacy case, there's very clear evidence that this receipt was nowhere in John Wayne Gacy's house before, and it was actually planted by one of the detectives. Bob goes into that a little bit more on his podcast, so I'm giving you just a very high level version of that. Um, but yeah, that's essentially what happened. And so we go through that's kind of why I asked that one question a few weeks ago, like, do we care that John Wayne Gacy's constitutional right to, proper search and seizure was violated if we know that what he did, essentially ending 30 plus lives, was kind of the end result of that? Like, do we care? And for some people, no, they don't care. They're like, um, what he did was wrong, and so good for him that he's, dead, or good for him that he was caught and everything like that. Now, other people will say that, like, if it can happen to somebody before they knew John Wayne Gacy was John Wayne Gacy, then who's to say that it wouldn't happen to a regular Joe Schmo and it hasn't happened, before, right? That somebody's planted evidence, and so there's that. So this current case that he's covering on the 2nd season is over a gentleman named Anthony Garcia. He was actually the practicing or the lead attorney, I think, or 2nd seat on the case, at the trial. So Anthony Garcia is a former doctor who is accused or convicted of, a murdering, like, people that he was in fellowship programs but ended up getting fired. So there was, like, this connection between all these people that were murdered, like these 2 doctors, a housekeeper, and a child, like a 10-year-old, were all murdered. And so they were like, "Oh, the evidence points to this person. We found maybe DNA." Bob has, like, a whole story on that. Like, it's crazy. I haven't gotten to season 2 yet because I'm still finishing the Gacy tapes. But, yeah, I thought that the question was interesting. I always pose it, and I posted it on Twitter too to see what people would say. And there was kind of like a half and half. Like, you know, you have to apply it fairly, like, all the way across the board. And thankfully, right? Um, kind of, I guess. I don't know. Um, they were still able to prosecute John Wayne Gacy and convict him of murder and eventually send him to death row despite the planted evidence. They had no the only people who knew that the evidence was planted, from what I understand, is just the detectives and maybe the prosecutors. But the defense attorney was trying Bob's dad was basically whose name is Bob, was trying to basically say, like, they got more than what they put on the search warrant. As you know, any true crime aficionado knows that the search warrant needs to be explicit and very clear of what they're looking for when they're going. Like, these have to be, like, dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure you tell us what you're getting. You can't just happen to find something without there being a cause for looking, right? So the way that the receipt was brought into evidence, oh, that would be a good one. That's a good one, Donnie. I'll tell him that. He'll probably chat his head off on that. Bob's a talker, so he'll do it. Um, there's the way that the receipt was brought into evidence was because, of course, Bob's dad was like, "Listen, they did these seizures, these search and seizures unlawfully. They took more than what they said they were going to take on the search warrant, and because it was said in the documentation that the receipt was found in a trash can, the way that the prosecution was able to circumvent getting that thrown out was, listen, they were looking for his wallet. They were looking for Robert Peace's wallet. So it would only make sense that they would search in a trash can for it. It's a small item. So, of course, they're going to look where you would likely discard a small item like that. And what would that be? A trash can. So I just happened to look in the trash can during the search, and lo and behold, there's this receipt that the young lady who was working with Robert Peace in the pharmacy that night says, like, "Oh yeah, I borrowed his jacket because I was working the register and the door was opening and it was cold. It was like 3 degrees outside or something, whatever happens in Illinois. And I had, like, submitted some pictures or whatever, and I took the receipt of that and put it in his pocket." And then John Wayne Gacy shows up the same time that Robert Peace's mom shows up to pick him up and approaches Robert Peace about going and getting a job, because that's typically how he lured his victims, was with the promise of a job. He was a contractor, so he's like, "Oh yeah, I have this work for you. Come to my house or come here." And then that's how he kind of entrapped them, sexually assaulted them, and then murdered them. So it's alleged. Obviously, we don't know specifics because the two people who could tell us are both gone with any sense of certainty, I mean. So Robert Peace, it's alleged, Robert Peace walks out of the pharmacy to the back because John Wayne Gacy had approached him and said, "Hey, come talk to me about this job." And so he was like, "Okay." He tells his mom, like, "I'm going to go talk to this guy out back about a job. I'll be right back in like 15 minutes. Somehow or another, Gacy ends up getting Peace into his car and leaves without, obviously, Robert being able to go back to his mom and say, like, "Hey, I'm gonna go and get this job." And he took his jacket, obviously, with him because it was cold, which means the receipt from the coworker was in the pocket, allegedly. Now, the detective in his book, because the detective did write a book basically saying all the stuff that he did during the investigation, said that, like, every night I would go to the family's house, have dinner, have drinks or something, and basically talk to them about um, the Peace case. Like, he would go to Robert Peace family and talk about the case or something like that, which is really odd, um, in my opinion. I don't know any detective who, like, goes and talks shop with the family of the potential missing person or murder victim, but he said that's what he did in his own book, in his own words. And so he says, yeah, I went there and we're having this conversation, and Robert's mom just happens to mention that Janine, or whatever her name is, who also refuses to, like, talk to Bob or the media about how the receipt came into his pocket, like what really happened. So there's a lot there. But she basically was like, "Oh yeah, she told me that she had mentioned that there was a receipt in Robert's pocket and blah 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 blah." And so they're like, "Oh, we gotta find this receipt." I don't remember specifically how the detective came across the receipt. You'd have to listen to the podcast, but he basically does, and then plants the evidence and says, like, "Oh, I found this in the trash can. Looky here." So this confirms that Robert Peace was with John Wayne Gacy. So now they have reason to believe that he's responsible for the disappearance at the time. They didn't know he was dead yet, but the disappearance of Robert Peace, and then, of course, through the continuous search warrants that they were doing, I think, illegally from what Bob says, um, that's how they found the rest of the bodies. And so I ask, in a devil advocate's way, knowing that this evidence was planted, we would have without that, I don't think they would have gotten what they needed or what they would have found. Like, throughout the time when detectives were, like, trailing him, they entered the house too, and so everybody's like, "Oh, you would for sure smell the stench of death, like, he had 30 bodies, in his house, or 27 bodies in his house, like, how could you not smell that, like, permeating through the floors?" But detectives who had walked in were like, "Yeah, I didn't smell anything." Um, Nobody, like, had really complained about that type of stuff from my recollection of it. Again, I'm, like, 30 episodes in, so it's a little shaky right now. But yeah, I it might be fun. So if we wanna do the Stephen Avery case, I'm down because that's another mind boggle for me. I always think, if not him, then who? If not him, and, if the new person did it, why? And how unlucky do you have to be, right? I had that conversation with somebody employee-wise. Like, "You must be really unlucky for all these coincidences to stack up, huh?" And they're like, "Yep, sure did." I'm like, "Okay." I would love to hear him, give us his opinion on Stephen Avery too, and kind of go into that. So I'm down if you guys are. Just let me know, um, in the chat if you are also interested in that, because I think that would be a really, um, curious thing. Now, I wonder. I don't know. I still don't know what to think about Stephen Avery in terms of him being guilty or innocent. Um, I think Brandon, what is it, Massey, right? Um, he wasn't released, right? He didn't get his bid for release or anything like that. So yeah, I think it would be fun to revisit that so that we could talk and get kind of a refresh on it. Brendan Dassey, there you go. Um, the whole making a murderer thing, I really hate that there was this kind of inappropriate relationship taking place that kind of skewed everything afterwards, because it makes you kind of question the integrity of the information that you're receiving and the editing, right? Because you're like, I have no idea. And then, of course, like, Kathleen Zellner taking on this case, I don't know. She also throws me for a loop. I would love to hear Bob's thoughts on her, because, she says she doesn't take on a case unless she believes the person is innocent. So she's done that with Stephen Avery. Um, but yeah, I think that the whole thing behind Stephen Avery and behind Brendan Dassey, there definitely needs to be a revisit from, a trial standpoint. I agree with you, Casey. Definitely from a trial standpoint, I would agree. Um, Even the West Memphis 3 thing, right? So the West Memphis 3, Damien Eccles et al. Went to the courtroom to request that the DNA sample that has been untested and could likely lead to the actual murderer of the 3 boys be tested. And okay, let me just tell you the bullshit that they were told. Um, oh my god, you guys. If you don't know anything about this yet, be prepared for okay, so we know that the West Memphis 3 were given Alfred pleas so that they could be released from jail. And so they basically did that as a way to get out and then hopefully clear their name. Now, the Alfred plea is basically saying, like, I'm not pleading one way or the other, but I agree you have a lot of evidence that could convict me. They didn't want to do that, but they thought that the best way for them to fight was outside, and I agree. I don't have any qualms with them taking the Alford plea, because I would have done the same thing to get out of prison, and to try and clear my name. So they go into court this week, and they request, to have the evidence retested, which, why would that be a problem? Why? You're thinking, like, I don't understand it. I don't understand the judgment. I know they're gonna continue to fight it, which I hope they do, and I hope that eventually the evidence is tested. But the judge basically said, like, "Listen, you should have taken the Alford plea if you wanted the evidence to clear your name. You've already admitted guilt, essentially. So you shouldn't have taken the Alford plea." And they're like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, they didn't want it televised. They didn't want it public. So it was people, like, we were depending on people who were in the courtroom, who were live tweeting or whatever. But they were basically, like, saying, like, "Because you took the Alfred plea, there's really no need to test the evidence because we already have the people who are responsible for the crimes. Now, if you wanted the evidence tested to find the real people, you should have never taken the plea." But then that speaks to all the other people who are currently behind bars, who are likely innocent and requesting DNA to be tested that's available and saying, like, "No, you've already been convicted. You're behind bars. You should accept an Alford plea," which is such crap. So I hope that they continue, which I know they will. I know Damien's very vocal about his need to do that. I would think, yes, Donnie, I would think that they would want to be like, "Let's just be sure." But a lot of people who follow the West Memphis 3 case believe that Terry Hobbs, the father or stepfather, I can't remember, of one of the boys is responsible for the murders. Like, a lot of suspicious things were happening with him, and that leads people to believe that he likely is the perpetrator of this. And so I don't know I don't know why they're so set on these 3 being the killers. Like, if you could find the actual person, then you have a chance, right? You have a chance to give the boys actual justice. An Alford plea is not actual justice. If I was one of their family members, and again, they had family members, I think Byers' dad, Christopher Byers, either father or stepfather, came out initially saying, like, no, these are the guys who did it. And then after kind of seeing everything, was like, yeah, no, I don't think they did it. I think we definitely need a retrial, or they're not the ones who did it. We need something. So I'm just like, come on, dude. This is 2022. I know we've rolled back women's rights to pre 1950, but at the very least, we should do better in our criminal justice system to be like, we should be sure. We should be sure about this. But whatever. Yeah, and again, you're right, it leads to potential misconduct, it leads to the potential, and I think this is really what they're trying to avoid. I think they're trying to avoid having to compensate these 3 for stealing so much of their life away from them. Essentially, to me, like my dad said, everything comes down to the dollar. They are trying to avoid any type of compensation being paid to them because of this. Um and you know what? Shame on them if that's the case, because these are people's lives. Like, they're technically felons, which if any I mean, if you guys know anybody who has a felony on their record, it's extremely hard to do anything. But anyways, we're at our time. I'll get off my soapbox. I'll talk to Bob about coming on and doing the um making a murderer case. I think that would be pretty cool. Um, and then, of course, you can do like an AMA for a defense attorney because I think his role is really interesting. And I think he said something like people often associate the attorney with the killer. So, like, they think you're just as bad for defending them. And I'm guilty of that, of thinking that too. Especially, when I was younger, being like, how could you defend somebody like this? They don't deserve it, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, also dumb. So there's that. Knowing Bob now, I know he's just like a good egg, and he believes in the Constitution, and he believes that, like, everybody deserves kind of a fair fight, and that the Constitution needs to be applied fairly across the board, and it can't be cherry picked, like I mentioned earlier in the John Wayne Gacy case. So I will be sure to connect with Bob and see if he's interested in doing that. I also might have an author on, or a documentarian on soon about some interesting little shows that are coming in Discovery, Netflix, and I believe Oxygen. So we'll see. Anyways, you guys, I appreciate you for hanging out with me for True Crime Tuesday and True Crime Convos. It's a larger part of Spotify Live's True Crime Night on Spotify Live, duh. So I appreciate you. Of course, you can always follow me on my Twitter if you'd like to suggest any cases that you'd like to see covered in future episodes. Happy to always connect and cover those. Everything is interesting. So I appreciate all of you for joining me, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. Stay safe, wash your hands, and, fight for women's rights because we need your help on that. Okay. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.